Don't you let go, Jacob. Do you hear me? Don't you dare let go. Grace Miller's voice cracked as she dropped the laundry basket, towels scattering across the polished marble floor. She bolted down the long corridor of the Hawthorne estate, her slippers slapping against the tile. The storm outside rattled the windows, but inside, the silence was shattered by the sight that froze her blood. Jacob Hawthorne, just 7 years old, lay crumpled beside his bed, his small chest fluttering like a bird too weak to take flight. His lips were pale blue. His tiny hand clawed at his chest, as though trying to dig out the pain. "Stay with me, sweetheart," Grace whispered, falling to her knees. Her hands trembled as she pressed 2 fingers against his neck. The pulse was faint, shallow, fading. "Jacob, look at me. Just keep your eyes open. That's all you have to do. Keep them open." The boy's lashes fluttered, but no words came. Only a weak wheeze. Grace's instinct screamed. No time. No one else would help. She scooped him into her arms, his little body, frighteningly lightened, stumbled into the hallway. "Help." Her voice rang out through the cavernous house. "Please, someone, help. Jacob's not breathing right." 2 staff members appeared. At the far end of the hall, Connie, the housekeeper, blinked slowly, wringing her hands. Jerome, the groundskeeper, leaned against the wall, unmoved. "That's not our responsibility," Connie muttered. "He's not our problem," Jerome added flatly. "Don't drag us into this." Grace's voice rose, breaking. "He could die right here. Please, call Mr. Hawthorne," Connie replied, her tone as cold as the marble beneath their feet. "Phones are down," Grace snapped. The storm had killed the power earlier that evening. No phones, no internet, no backup. They all knew it. And yet they stood, frozen, unwilling. "You're the one who's always poking around that kid," Jerome said, his words laced with disdain. "You handle it." Grace's breath caught in her throat. "I will." She turned and ran not back toward the kitchen, not toward the useless staff but toward the east wing. Her heart thundered as she reached the heavy oak door to the forbidden study, Charles Hawthorne's private sanctum. She had never set foot inside. Staff weren't allowed, but rules meant nothing now. "Hold on, Jacob," she whispered, setting him gently against her shoulder. She pulled a small fruit knife from her apron pocket and jammed it into the lock. With a desperate twist, the mechanism clicked. The door swung open. The study was sleek, cold, every surface polished to perfection. She kicked it shut behind her, rushing to the wall panel she had seen Charles use once. With trembling fingers, she pried it open. A safe, unlatched, inside. Neat bundles of cash. A Tesla key fob gleamed in the dim light. The alarm screamed instantly, red lights flashing across the room. Grace didn't flinch. She stuffed a thick roll of bills into her pocket, snatched the key fob, wrapped Jacob tighter in a blanket from the couch, and ran. Down the hallway, through the garage, into the driver's seat of a car she had only polished but never touched. She pressed the start button, the vehicle humming to life. Lights flashing against the rain-slicked concrete. "Please, please," she begged, glancing at Jacob in the passenger seat. His head lolled against the headrest, lips still pale. "Stay with me, baby, stay." The Tesla tore down the long driveway, tires hissing over wet gravel, lightning splitting the sky above. Grace gripped the wheel with one hand, the other reaching for Jacob's trembling fingers. "Don't you let go, Jacob," she whispered again, her voice breaking. "Don't you dare let go." For one terrifying moment, the boy's eyelids fluttered open. His lips parted, and the faintest whisper escaped. Grace, tears blurred her vision. Yes, sweetheart, it's me. I've got you. The rain fell harder, the wipers thrashing, visibility near nothing. But Grace pressed on, eyes darting between the slick road and the fragile child beside her. Every red light, every empty intersection was a test of nerve. By the time she screeched into the ER bay of Mercy Hills Hospital, her heart was hammering so violently she thought it might give out too. She jumped out, yanked open the passenger door, and lifted Jacob in her arms. Help! Somebody, please! She shouted, stumbling through the sliding doors. This child has a heart condition. He's not breathing right. Nurses rushed toward her, wheeling a gurney. Hands reached out, steady, professional. They took Jacob from her arms, attaching monitors, slipping an oxygen mask over his face. A doctor's voice was calm but urgent. Arrhythmia, severe. He needs immediate intervention. Grace stood, soaked to the skin, chest heaving. For the first time since she had found Jacob on the floor, she allowed herself a single breath of relief. And then the cold voice cut through it all. Grace Miller, she turned. 2 uniformed police officers stood in the hallway, their faces unreadable. Yes, she said, her voice still shaking. You're being detained for theft and unauthorized vehicle use. Turn around, ma'am. Her eyes widened. What? No, I wasn't stealing. I was saving him. Turn around. The cuffs clicked around her wrists, biting against her soaked skin. Her heart thundered again, this time with disbelief. She twisted toward the emergency doors, straining for one last glimpse of Jacob. The boy's small frame was being wheeled away, the beeping of machines fading into the sterile hum of the hospital. I wasn't stealing, she cried, her voice raw. I was saving him. But the officers didn't answer. To them, she was just another case file, another infraction in a world where perception was power, and the word of a maid meant nothing. As they led her toward the squad car, Grace glanced over her shoulder at the ER doors. She whispered to herself, her throat tight, her vision blurred with tears. He called my name. He asked for me. He knows the truth. The storm raged on outside, the rain pelting the asphalt like a relentless drumbeat. The red and blue lights of the cruiser flashed against shuttered storefronts and dark diners as the car pulled away. Grace sat in the back seat, wrists bound, soaked to the bone, her heart breaking in silence. But even through the humiliation, the fear, the injustice pressing down on her chest, one truth kept her alive. Jacob had lived another night, and if she had to fight the whole world to keep him alive again, she would. The part that scares you, the detective said, setting a paper cup of water on the metal table, is usually the part I need to hear first. The cell had no window, only a humming vent and a clock that refused to move. Grace Miller sat cuffed to a bench that was colder than the rain she'd run through, sleeves still damp, hair still clinging to her neck. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the same thing, a small hand trying to hold on, a pair of lips going pale, a heartbeat whispering for help. I'm not scared for me, she answered. I'm scared for the minutes. They go fast when a child can't breathe. Detective Raymond Colate, 50s, grey at the temples, the kind of face that had learned patience the hard way, took a seat opposite her. He didn't posture, didn't play to the room. He clicked his pen once, and the sound landed like a green light. All right, he said. Tell me the part about the minutes. Grace breathed in. The storm knocked the power out. No phones. No internet. Jacob was on the floor, and I could barely feel a pulse. I called for help. No one moved. I took him. I broke the study lock with a fruit knife, grabbed emergency cash, grabbed the car key. I chose the ER over permission. She swallowed. If I was wrong, I'd answer to a judge. If I waited, I'd answer to a grave. Cole let that settle. He scribbled 3 words on his notepad. Storm, minutes, choice. You knew that room was off limits, he said. I knew a child wasn't. He studied her. You understand, Mr. Hawthorne filed a formal complaint. The father, Cole confirmed. He's upset. Says you crossed every line he set to protect his home. Grace looked down at her cuffed wrist. Lines. Protect homes, she said quietly. They shouldn't outvote breath. He didn't smile, but his eyes softened by a degree. The hospital confirmed arrhythmia. Severe. The timeline you gave aligns with intake. That helps you, but a complaint is a complaint. Then put me with the only jury that matters, she said. His heartbeat. Cole's pen paused. You always talk like that. I talk like a mother who ran out of minutes once. He didn't ask for the name. She didn't offer it. The silence was not empty. It was something like respect. Cole tore a sheet from his pad, folded it, slid it into his pocket. I'll request the security system logs, he said. Power goes out, but access attempts leave footprints. I'll also need statements from the staff. They won't. Talk, Grace said. They were trained not to touch him. If something went wrong, the blame would live on their hands. Cole blinked once. Where'd you hear that? Every hallway, she said. You can hear a rule even when no one says it out loud. A uniformed officer opened the door and leaned in. Detective, Mr. Hawthorne's here. Cole glanced at Grace. Stay put, he said gently, as if she had anywhere else to go. The corridor outside smelled like coffee that had been reheated too many times. Charles Hawthorne stood near the front desk, rain still jeweled on the shoulders of his coat. His jaw was set in a way that said both decision and regret. Beside him, Victoria, sterling, elegant, immaculate. Her expression honed to a thin edge, kept her arms folded, gaze moving with a practiced calm. Detective, Charles said without preamble. I want this handled properly. There are lines. In my house for a reason. Cole nodded. Your son's stable. The physician says he's resting. Charles stared at a scuff on the floor as if it had personally offended him. He asked for her, he added, and the sentence fell like a coin into a well. Victoria's voice cut cleanly. Children ask for many things when they're frightened. That doesn't make this trespass disappear. She flicked her eyes. Up at Cole, the study lock was broken. Cash was taken. A vehicle was removed without authorization. She undermined the household in a crisis. We can't reward that. Cole's tone stayed even, and yet the boy is alive because she moved. Those facts will share a room before this is over. Victoria's smile did not reach her eyes. Mercy isn't policy, detective. Neither is paralysis, Cole returned. Charles exhaled, the breath round with fatigue. File what you must, he said, and the frustration was aimed as much at himself as the situation. Just keep this from spiraling. Cole watched him for another heartbeat, then stepped back. I'll do my job, Mr. Hawthorne. I suggest everyone else do theirs. When he returned to the interview room, Grace was tracing an invisible circle on the table with her fingertip, a habit from a life of wiping away water rings before anyone else noticed them. They filed, Cole said. I can't ignore it. Didn't ask you to, she replied. I asked you to see it. He stood. Arraignment is in the morning. A public defender will be assigned. I'll get the hospital's full report. If there's anything to corroborate your timeline further, I'll bring it. In the meantime, he hesitated, searching for the right measure. In the meantime, borrow my minutes. I've got a few lefts. The door opened again. A matronly voice, soft and steady, floated in ahead of its owner. Excuse me, detective. You said I could speak with her for a moment. 2 minutes. Miss Johnson, Cole said. Through the glass. Harriet Johnson's hair was gathered at the nape of her neck, silver threads streaking through like early winter. She pressed her palm to the visitor window as Grace approached, and for one moment the cheap fluorescent light did something holy. It turned the space between their hands into warmth. I came as soon as I heard, Harriet said through the phone. They told me you ran in the rain and never looked back. Jacob was turning blue, Grace whispered. You run for blue. Harriet nodded, eyes shining. Some houses teach you to dust the frames and ignore the portraits, she said. You never learned that lesson, and I'm glad. Grace tried to laugh. It broke halfway. They're saying I broke rules. You broke a lock, Harriet corrected. The rule broke itself the day someone wrote no touch above a child. Grace closed her eyes, swallowed hard. When she opened them, the older woman was watching her with a quiet fierceness. I trained staff in that house, Harriet went on. Then the rules changed. People got scared of the wrong thing. They forgot breath is not negotiable. She leaned a little closer to the glass. Listen to me. Shame is loud. Truth is patient. Let truth take its full breath. Will anyone speak? Grace asked Connie, Jerome. They're afraid, Harriet admitted. Afraid of losing checks. Afraid of crossing a line drawn by people who love lines more than children. But fear cracks where love stands. I'll stand. A tear slid cleanly down Grace's cheek. Thank you. Harriet placed her fingers flat on the glass again. When you held that boy, she said, you weren't breaking into a life that wasn't yours. You were keeping a heartbeat until his father remembered how. She inhaled, steady. You did the right thing, the right way, at the right time. That combination is rare. Don't let anyone rename it. Cole tapped his watch gently. Harriet nodded, mouthing, I'll be back, and stepped away. On her way out, she stopped beside the detective. Detective Cole, she said softly, you've got good eyes. Use them. He gave the smallest of bows. I intend to. Later, as the precinct quieted and the buzz of the soda machine flattened. Into the hour, Cole returned with a clipboard. Intake says arraignment at 9. He told Grace, you'll likely be processed before 8. I'll see you there. He paused. One more thing. The ER attending added a note. Time to care decisive. Transport timeline, likely life-saving. That's not law, but it's weight. Grace nodded, a breath she didn't know she'd been holding, leaving her chest. Thank you. He reached for the door, then turned back. You said something earlier, he murmured. If I was wrong, I'd answer to a judge. If I waited, I'd answer to a grave. He tilted his head. That's the kind of sentence juries remember. Don't waste it. When the door closed, the room felt bigger by an inch. Grace leaned her head against the cool cinder block wall and let the night settle around her. Somewhere across town, a small boy slept with a plastic mask, misting his breath into steady rhythm. Somewhere in another building, a father stared at a ceiling and tried to decide which line mattered more, the one on the doorframe or the one on a monitor that rose and fell like hope in a cell without windows. Grace learned something she already knew. Light isn't a window you wait for. It's a hand you keep holding, even when no one else does. And when morning came, she would tell a room full of rules about the one rule that never breaks: minutes matter. State of California versus Grace Miller. The bailiff's voice rang out across the courtroom, heavy as the storm that still lingered outside. The wooden benches creaked as reporters leaned forward, pens scratching, eyes hungry. A dozen sketches would capture the same woman, hair still damp from last night's rain, wrists bruised from handcuffs, shoulders squared in defiance of the weight pressing down. Grace rose slowly when her name was called. Her knees threatened to buckle, but she willed them straight. Behind her, whispers curled like smoke. The maid, the theft, the boy, the judge. A woman with silver hair, pulled tight, and glasses perched low on her nose, adjusted a stack of files. The charges, she said evenly, include unlawful entry, theft, and unauthorized use of a motor vehicle. How does the defendant plead? Grace opened her mouth, but her newly appointed public defender, Laura Chambers, touched her arm lightly. Not guilty, Your Honor, Laura said firmly, her voice cutting through the tension like a bell. The prosecutor stood slick, grey suit, hair combed sharp, his tone rehearsed. The facts are simple, he declared. The defendant forced entry into a private office, stole over $20,000 in cash, and absconded with a luxury vehicle, transporting a child she was not authorized to transport. Her actions were reckless, illegal, and placed that child in further danger. A murmur rippled through the gallery. Grace's chest tightened. She wanted to scream. He was dying. I carried him because no one else would. Instead, Laura rose. Your Honor, the facts may be simple, but the truth never is. My client acted in a crisis. Phones were down, the staff refused to intervene, and a 7-year-old child was turning blue. Without her immediate action, that boy might not be alive today. The judge held up a hand. Save your full arguments for trial. Today is arraignment and bail hearing. Still, the words had landed. Grace could feel it in the air, a single drop of possibility against a storm of accusation. The prosecutor pressed forward. We ask bail be set at $50,000. The defendant is a flight risk and poses a danger by disregarding household rules. Laura countered instantly. She has no record, no history of violence, no evidence of flight risk, and the hospital records confirmed the child was admitted with a life-threatening arrhythmia. If she hadn't acted, we would be discussing a funeral, not a hearing. Mercy is not recklessness. Your Honor, it is responsibility. The judge leaned back, expression unreadable. Bail is set at $30,000. The gavel struck. The sound echoed like a stone dropped in water. Grace's heart sank. 30,000. She didn't have $30. She lowered her head, but then a voice from the gallery, faint but piercing. She saved him. The court officer barked. Order, but the words were out, hanging in the air. Heads turned. It was Angela Kim, a nurse from the ER. Her cheeks flushed, but her eyes did not waver. She repeated it once more, quieter this time, but no less certain. She saved that boy. The judge rapped the gavel again. One more outburst and I'll clear the room. But Grace's breath steadied. For a moment, she wasn't alone. When court adjourned, Grace was escorted back through the narrow corridor to the holding cell. Her wrists ached, but her mind burned hotter. She pressed her hands against the cold steel bench and whispered, $30,000. That's not bail, that's a wall. From the corner, Laura stepped in, voice hushed. Walls can be climbed. Don't lose your footing now. Grace looked at her. Do you actually believe me, or are you just doing your job? Laura's eyes were sharp, but not unkind. I don't take cases I don't believe in. You need to know something. The court of law is only half the battle. The court of perception is the other half. Right now, the story being told is that you're a thief who staged a miracle. Grace's throat tightened. And the truth? Laura leaned closer. The truth is that you ran into a storm carrying a boy no one else would touch. But truth moves slower than headlines. You'll need people willing to speak it aloud. Grace exhaled, shaky. Then I'll give them every breath I've got. That night, as rain tapped against the small barred window, Grace sat alone, knees pulled to her chest. Every sound in the holding wing was a reminder. Clanging doors, muted arguments, shoes scuffing against concrete. She closed her eyes and saw Jacob's face again, lips blue, lashes trembling, the faint whisper of her name, Grace. Her tears came silent, sliding down cheeks already stung. She pressed her palm against her heart. He asked for me. That means something. Across town, the Hawthorne penthouse glowed against the wet skyline. Charles Hawthorne stood before the glass wall, hands in his pockets, eyes unfocused on the city below. His reflection stared back at him, the powerful man, the unbending father, the figure who believed control was safety. Behind him, Victoria Sterling lounged on a leather chair, scrolling through news updates on her tablet. It's everywhere, she said, Maid or manipulator. Half the country thinks she's a hero, the other half thinks she staged it. Charles's jaw tightened. He keeps asking for her, he muttered. Victoria set the tablet aside, rising gracefully. He's 7, Charles. Children cling to whoever pays them attention. That doesn't mean she belongs near him. Charles turned. Then why didn't he asked for you? The silence snapped between them like a brittle twig. Victoria's eyes flashed. Don't twist this. She broke into your office. She stole from you. If you let this slide, you'll look weak to your board, your investors, your staff, and weakness spreads. Charles's voice dropped, almost a whisper. If she hadn't done it, I'd be burying my son. Victoria's heels clicked sharply against the floor as she approached. No, if she hadn't done it, we'd have found another way. You cannot let one desperate woman rewrite your rules. You'll lose more than you'll gain. Charles looked away, back toward the cities. Neon veins. He said nothing more. But the storm inside him was louder than the storm outside. Midnight, the holding cell buzzed with fluorescent light. Grace curled on the bench, fighting sleep, when a soft voice reached her ear. Miss Miller. She lifted her head. A guard stood at the bars, phone in hand. You have a call, restricted number. Grace hesitated, then took the receiver. Hello. On the other end, a small voice, fragile but alive. Grace, her knees nearly buckled. Jacob, it's me. A faint shuffle, a nurse's voice in the background. They don't want me to call, but the nurse helped. I told Daddy you saved me. I told him you held me when nobody else did. Tears blurred her sight. Sweetheart, you scared me half to death. How are you feeling? Better. My heart doesn't feel all weird anymore. They gave me new medicine. But Grace, his voice cracked. Don't leave me. Grace pressed her forehead against the wall. I'm right here, Jacob. I'm not going anywhere, no matter what. They say, I'm not letting go. Before she could say more, the line cut soft beep, call ended. Grace stood motionless, receiver pressed against her cheek, heart hammering with equal parts despair and hope. He asked for me, she whispered, into the empty cell. That means something. That means everything. And as the night stretched long, a single thought carried her through, in the court of perception. Sometimes the smallest voice, a child's whisper, could be the loudest truth of all. Detective Raymond Cole leaned over his desk, the glow of the precinct computer throwing tired lines across his face. The log files flickered back in a steady column of data. Timestamps, camera IDs, and then nothing. At 9:42 p.m., the same moment the storm cut power, every record froze, yet the system didn't fail completely. A note in the margins read, deleted. Manually. Cole exhaled, tapping his pen. Storms don't delete footage, he muttered. People do. He slid the report into a folder marked Hawthorne Estate. The narrative he was expected to repeat, that Grace Miller had staged an act of theft for attention, was already wobbling. Something, or someone, had made the house blind on purpose. The courtroom was smaller this time, but no less tense. Grace stood between Laura Chambers and a guard, wrists free now, but posture still bound by invisible chains. The prosecutor opened with fire. Miss Miller, he said, his voice crisp as glass, has demonstrated disregard for boundaries, breaking into a private study, seizing a luxury vehicle, taking large sums of cash. This is not heroism, it's manipulation disguised as mercy. Grace stared at the table, jaw clenched. Laura rose. Calm but fierce. Your Honor, this isn't a case of boundaries. It's a case of breath. My client acted in crisis when no one else would, and we're not here to argue in shadows. We brought voices of truth. The judge tilted her head. Proceed. Angela Kim, the ER nurse, stepped forward first. Her scrubs looked out of place in the polished courtroom, but her eyes burned with conviction. That night, Angela said, steady as steel, the boy was his heart was failing. If Miss Miller hadn't arrived exactly when she did, he would not be alive today. The attending physician credited her timing as decisive. Those are the facts. Everything else is noise, the gallery murmured. The judge scribbled something on her pad. Then Harriet Johnson rose, her hair pulled back, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched her purse. I worked in that house for 25 years, Harriet began. I trained most of the staff before I retired. But when new policies came down, everything changed. We were told, do not touch the boy unless directly instructed. We were told to clean, to wait, to watch, but not to act. That child grew up without the basic grace of a hand on his shoulder when he coughed. The night Grace carried him out, she broke a rule that never should have existed. She paused, her voice cracking, and thank God she did. The silence that followed was heavy and human. Grace closed her eyes, her breath shaking. In the darkness, behind her lids, she saw Tyler, again her own son, gasping for air while doctors debated paperwork. She remembered standing powerless, her hands aching to help but bound by protocol. Her eyes opened to Jacob's memory, his small hand curling around hers in that hospital bed, the same hand she had held when Tyler's slipped away. Past and present fused. Two boys separated by years but connected by her refusal to wait again. Laura's voice cut gently through the silence. Mercy is not a crime. Neglect is. The judge looked down at her notes, then up again. Bail reduction is granted. set at 5,000. The gavel struck. This time, the echo sounded less like doom and more like possibility. Grace almost stumbled back into her chair. 5,000 was still unreachable for her, but not unreachable for a community. Later that afternoon, outside the courthouse, a small group gathered. No reporters, no flashing cameras, just Harriet, Angela, and a handful of neighbors Grace barely knew. Esther, her voice steady, pressed an envelope into Laura's hand. "It isn't much," Esther said, "but we passed the basket at church. You don't leave someone standing alone when they've carried what we couldn't." Grace's throat tightened. "You don't even know me." Harriet touched her arm. "We know what you did. That's enough." When the paperwork cleared, Grace's first stop was Mercy Hills Hospital. She walked down the pediatric wing with slow, uneven steps, each one echoing in her chest like a prayer. The antiseptic smell hit her, sharp and sterile, but behind it lingered the faint scent of crayons and plastic toys. Jacob lay propped up on pillows, pale but awake. His eyes lit when he saw her. "Grace." His voice was hoarse but alive. He reached out instinctively, and before anyone could stop her, she crossed the room and took his small hand in hers. His fingers curled weakly around her own. "When you held my hand," he whispered, "I wasn't scared anymore." Grace's lips trembled. "That's because I promised I wouldn't let go, and I meant it." In her mind, Tyler's face flickered a hospital bed, monitors, the sound of alarms. The moment his hand slipped free, the ache surged, but this time it carried something else with it: healing. For Jacob, she had held on. The door creaked softly. Charles Hawthorne stood at the threshold, his frame filling the doorway. He hadn't announced himself, hadn't cleared his throat. He simply stood there, watching the scene before him. His son's hand wrapped around Grace's eyes, shining with tears. For the first time in years, something in Charles shifted. He remembered the way Jacob had called her name, not his, when he woke. The way his boy's shoulders relaxed when she entered a room. Victoria's words echoed in his mind. "She shamed you." But watching Jacob now, Charles wondered if shame was less dangerous than blindness. He didn't step inside. He didn't interrupt. He simply stood, unseen, and let the picture etch itself into the walls of his conscience. Jacob, fragile but safe. Grace, scarred but steadfast. Two stories of the same night. One written in ink on police reports, the other carved in the quiet grip of a child who finally knew he wasn't alone. And as Charles turned away, his footsteps heavy with indecision, Grace whispered to Jacob, "Sleep now, sunshine. I'll be right here when you wake." For the first time since the storm, Jacob closed his eyes without fear, and for the first time since she lost Tyler. Grace believed that maybe, just maybe, she could keep a heartbeat steady long enough to change more than one life. The Hawthorne penthouse had always been a fortress of glass and steel. Tonight, it felt like a cage. Charles Hawthorne stood near the bar, a tumbler of water in his hand, staring into the skyline as if answers hid among the city's scattered lights. Behind him, Victoria Sterling paced the length of the marble floor, heels clicking sharp against the silence. "You're letting her win," Victoria snapped, her voice slicing the air. Charles didn't turn. She saved him. She shamed. "You," Victoria shot back. "Don't confuse the two." Finally, Charles faced her, jaw taut. Jacob was blue. His heart was failing. And she carried him into the storm when none of us moved. Victoria stopped pacing. Her eyes narrowed, but her tone softened into something far more dangerous than anger certainty. And now the world sees a billionaire who couldn't save his own son while a maid played hero. You can't afford that story, Charles. Not with your board, not with investors. He set the glass down harder than he meant to, water sloshing over the rim. My son almost died. I don't care about investors. Tonight, Victoria tilted her head, studying him like she might a boardroom opponent. You say that now, but when this blows up in the press, when clients whisper about your judgment, you'll care. She crossed a line. If you forgive it, you redraw every line in this house. Charles's voice dropped. Maybe the lines were in the wrong place. For the first time, Victoria faltered. She turned away, her reflection fractured in the glass wall. You've changed, she murmured, and not for the stronger. Across town, Grace sat in Laura Chambers' modest office, hands curled around a chipped mug of tea she hadn't touched. She was exhausted, but Laura's sharp eyes refused to let her drift. Grace, Laura said firmly, we won today. Bail reduction was no small victory, but this fight isn't over. The truth isn't enough on its own. Grace looked up, startled. Isn't truth supposed to be enough? Laura leaned forward. Not when perception is louder. The prosecution will spin you as reckless. They'll call you obsessed with a child who wasn't yours. If we want to win, we need witnesses. We need heart. People who saw you care when others didn't. Grace swallowed hard. And if they stay silent, then we make noise, Laura said simply. The right kind. Grace lowered her eyes to the mug in her hands. I don't want to be a headline. I just want him to breathe. Laura's voice softened. Then let's fight for both, his breath and your truth. The article recounted the facts, the storm, the broken lock, the drive through the rain. It cited Angela Kim's testimony. It noted Harriet's damning phrase, no-touch policy. And though the tone was cautious, the closing line lingered. Sometimes the hero is the one who refuses to wait. Grace read it in the corner of Laura's office, her breath catching. Do you think anyone will believe it? She asked. Laura folded the paper neatly. Some will. Enough to make the others wonder. That's how the tide turns slow, then all at once. That afternoon, Grace returned to Mercy Hills Hospital. She entered Jacob's room under the quiet supervision of a nurse, her heart pounding like it did the first time she carried him through the storm. Jacob's face lit up the moment he saw her. Grace. His voice was still weak, but his joy was unshakable. She hurried to his side. How's my sunshine today? He grinned. Better. The medicine helps. But I like it most when you're here. Her throat tightened. She reached for his hand, small and fragile in hers. He studied her fingers against his and whispered, when you held my hand, I wasn't scared anymore. Her eyes stung. She bent closer. That's because holding on means more than fear. And I'll hold on as long as you need me. Jacob tilted his head. Even if Daddy says no. Grace froze. The nurse pretended not to hear. Slowly, she nodded. Even then. Because sometimes love isn't about permission, it's about presence. He squeezed her fingers gently, a gesture so small yet so mighty that it shook the walls she'd built around her grief. In that touch, Tyler's absence ached less sharply. His memory lived in her choice to never let go again. Outside the hospital, Charles sat in his car, engine idling. He had come to check on Jacob, but instead found himself staring at the window of his son's room. Through the blinds, he glimpsed Grace leaning over Jacob's bed. Their hands joined. Victoria's words haunted him. She shamed you. But Jacob's laughter light, fragile, free, broke through the glass like sunlight. For the first time, Charles wondered aloud. Maybe shame isn't the worst thing. Maybe blindness is. He closed his eyes, torn between the empire he had built and the boy he was failing to see. Back in her small rented room that night, Grace pulled Tyler's photo from her purse. She studied his smile, frozen in time, and whispered, "I couldn't save you, but I saved him. And maybe, just maybe, that's how I carry you forward." The room was silent but for her breath. She placed the photo on the nightstand, then laid her hand across her chest, feeling the thud of her own heart. One choice had brought her here. One choice had saved a boy's life. But choices carried weight, and hers now stretched beyond herself. Tomorrow, the world would still doubt. The headlines would still cut. Victoria's venom would still spread. But tonight, in the quiet hum of her pulse, Grace knew one thing with certainty. Holding on was worth the wait, and she would not let go. The courthouse smelled faintly of polish and old paper, a place where decisions outlived the people who made them. Grace stood at the defense table, her palms damp, her eyes fixed on the grain of the wood. Laura Chambers leaned in close, her voice a quiet anchor. "Remember," Laura whispered, "speak with heart, not length. A single true sentence carries more weight than 1,000 excuses." Grace nodded. She had no excuses left, anyway, only truth. The prosecutor rose first, his suit as crisp as his words. "This case is not about compassion," he told the judge. "It's about law." The defendant entered a locked room, stole significant sums of money, and drove a child she had no legal authority to transport. Even in crisis, we cannot allow lawlessness to masquerade as heroism. Grace bit the inside of her cheek, holding still. Laura stood slowly, her presence quiet but unyielding. "Your Honor, the law is meant to protect life, not bury it under protocol. My client acted when no one else would. We're not asking for sympathy. We're asking for recognition of what actually happened. A child is alive because of her choice." The judge's expression remained unreadable. "Proceed with your witnesses." Angela Kim stepped forward. Her badge from Mercy Hills Hospital glinted under the fluorescent lights. "That boy would not be here today without Miss Miller," Angela said firmly. "I watched her bring him in, soaked, frantic, holding him like he was her own. The monitor showed arrhythmia. He was slipping fast. The attending physician said minutes mattered. She gave us those minutes." "Are you suggesting," the prosecutor pressed, "that theft and unlawful entry are justified if the outcome is favorable?" Angela didn't flinch. "I'm suggesting that saving a child's life is never theft. It's humanity." A murmur stirred through the courtroom benches. The judge lifted her pen but said nothing. Next came Harriet Johnson. She clutched her purse as if it were a shield, but her voice carried steady. "I served that household for decades. I knew Jacob from his first steps. But when new policies arrived, we were told to keep our hands off. No touch, they called it. We watched that boy grow up without the comfort of a hand when he coughed, without anyone to lift him when he stumbled. Grace broke that rule. And thank God she did, because rules should never cost a child his breath." Her words hung in the air like a prayer. Finally, Laura turned to Grace. "Would you like to speak?" Grace rose slowly, her knees trembling but her voice surprisingly steady. "That night, I found Jacob on the floor, gasping, turning blue. I begged for help, and none came. Phones were dead. Staff turned away. I remembered my own son, Tyler, whose breath slipped away while people argued over paperwork. I couldn't let that happen again. I chose responsibility so he'd have another breath. That's the only reason I touched that door, that money, that car. She swallowed hard, her eyes glistening. If saving a child's heartbeat is wrong, then I'll carry that wrong for the rest of my life. The silence was deafening. Even the judge seemed momentarily still. Then Detective Cole stepped into the witness box. His gravelly voice filled the room. I reviewed the estate's security logs. The cameras didn't just fail during the storm. They were deleted manually. The timing matches the very window when Miss Miller carried Jacob out. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. The prosecutor shifted, uneasy. Do you know who deleted them? The judge asked. Cole shook his head. Not yet. But I know this much. Someone didn't want the truth seen. And that tells me something was wrong in that house, long before Miss Miller forced that lock. The gavel rapped once. That will be enough for today. We'll reconvene. Grace sat down, her body trembling. For the first time since the cuffs, she felt the scales tip slightly, not toward freedom, but toward possibility. Outside, Charles Hawthorne stood in the marble corridor, his hands clenched in fists at his sides. He had listened to every word. He had watched Angela's conviction, Harriet's sorrow, Grace's trembling honesty, and now Cole's revelation gnawed at him. Deleted footage, someone hiding the truth inside his own walls. Victoria appeared beside him, her voice sharp. You can't let this sway you. They're dramatizing, twisting sympathy into strategy. Charles turned, his eyes flashing. And what if it's not strategy? What if it's the truth? Her lips pressed thin. The truth is, she trespassed, she stole, and now she's painting herself as a savior, while the world questions your judgment. She is a savior. Charles said hoarsely. Jacob is alive because of her. Do you understand that? Alive. Victoria stepped closer, lowering her voice. Do you understand what you stand to lose if you let her rewrite this? The empire you built, the respect you command. The board will see weakness. Charles's voice cracked, raw. And what good is an empire if my son doesn't breathe? The words hit the air like thunder. Victoria recoiled, her eyes burning. For the first time in years, Charles felt himself split in two, the man who built walls of glass and steel, and the father who heard his child whisper another woman's name. That night, Charles couldn't sleep. The storm had passed, but his mind churned louder than thunder. He paced his study, the very room Grace had broken into. The lock gleamed freshly repaired. The safe sat closed, a silent accusation. On his desk lay the file, the complaint he had signed, the charges pressed. His pen rested beside it, heavy as lead. He walked to Jacob's room instead. The boy lay asleep, his chest rising slowly under the thin blanket. Charles stepped closer, watching the small hand curled into the fabric. For a fleeting second, he saw that hand in Grace's, the grip, the steadiness, the absence of fear. Jacob stirred in his sleep, murmuring softly, Grace. Charles's throat tightened. He sank into the chair by the bed, his head in his hands. The phone in his pocket vibrated. A reminder from his attorney, signed confirmation to proceed with charges. Charles pulled it out, screen glowing in the dim light. His thumb hovered over the document, his chest heaved. Through the doorway, Victoria's shadow loomed faintly, waiting for his decision. Charles looked back at Jacob, sleeping peacefully for the first time in weeks. His thumb trembled above the screen. The key was turning inside him toward pride or toward mercy. And for the first time, Charles didn't know which door he would open. The dawn broke over Manhattan with a haze that blurred the skyline. But inside Grace's small apartment, the light felt sharp and merciless. She hadn't slept. Tyler's photo sat on the nightstand, her anchor and her wound. She kept asking herself the same question. How long can truth hold when power insists otherwise? The answer came in a knock, not the impatient rattle of police, not Laura's measured rap. This one was heavy, hesitant. She opened the door and froze. Charles Hawthorne stood in the hall, stripped of his tailored armor. No tie, no entourage, no Victoria at his side. Just a man, weary, with something breaking behind his eyes. Grace's voice caught. "What are you doing here?" "I needed to see you," he said quietly, alone. Her instinct was to slam the door. Instead, she let the silence hold. Finally, she stepped aside. He entered slowly, scanning the modest space as if it were another courtroom he had no control over. He didn't sit. He stood with his hands behind his back, like a schoolboy, about to confess. "I've been blind," Charles said finally. "And you weren't." Grace blinked, the words striking deeper than she expected. "Excuse me, you carried my son when I didn't see him, when I didn't listen." His voice wavered, then hardened. "I signed those papers because I was angry at you, at myself, at a world where my boy could be snatched from me in a breath. But you didn't steal him from me. You gave him back." Grace's throat tightened. "Do you have any idea what those papers have done to me? To my name, to my life?" His gaze dropped. "I do now. And I'm here to say, I'm pulling them back. The charges, they'll be withdrawn by tomorrow." She staggered into a chair. "Just like that?" Charles stepped closer. "No, not just like that. It took a storm, a courtroom, and my son whispering your name in his sleep. That's what it took." Grace studied him, unsure if this was repentance or performance. "Why tell me first?" "Because I needed you to hear it from me, not the press, not a lawyer, from me. I was wrong." The words hung in the air, fragile but alive. For the first time, Charles Hawthorne admitted defeat, not in business, but in pride. The news spread. By the next morning, charges withdrawn. Grace walked into Laura's office, her chest lighter than it had been in weeks, though not free. "You should be celebrating," Laura said, eyes sharp over her glasses. Grace shook her head. "Dropping charges doesn't erase what's broken. It just means the fight changes shape." "What fight?" Grace sat straighter. "This wasn't just about me. Jacob could have died because no one recognized the signs, because no one acted. That's not just a family's flaws, a system's flaw. People need to know what to look for. They need to be taught." Laura leaned back, intrigued. "Taught what, exactly?" "The heartbeat," Grace whispered. "How to see it, how to save it. A foundation. Classes, workshops, so no one has to choose between rules and rescue." Laura arched a brow. "And what would you call it?" Grace hesitated, then smiled faintly. "Hardwell. Because hearts deserve more than hope. They deserve care." Laura was silent for a moment, then nodded. "Ambitious, messy, maybe impossible." Grace's eyes burned. So was carrying Jacob through that storm. "But I did it." The first planning session was small. Grace sat at a folding table in the back of Harriet Johnson's church, a stack of handwritten notes beside her. Harriet brought coffee. Angela Kim arrived with a thick binder of medical guidelines. Laura came late, dropping legal pads across the table. It won't be easy, Angela warned. Hospitals are slow to change. Parents trust doctors, not maids. With courage, Grace flinched, but Harriet cut in. Let them call her what they want. She did what they didn't. Laura tapped her pen. The real obstacle isn't the idea, it's funding. Without money, this is a dream scribbled on paper. Grace exhaled. Then we start with paper. We start with stories, with every hand that held on when no one else did. But reality intruded quickly. Their first community outreach, held in a modest school gym, drew fewer people than Grace had hoped. A mother approached her afterward, arms folded. "You mean?" "Well," the woman said, "but why should I trust someone with no medical degree to tell me about my child's heart?" Grace steadied her voice. "Because I carried a boy through the rain when everyone else turned away. Because I lost my own. Once, and I refused to let another slip." The woman studied her, still skeptical. "Words don't save lives." "No," Grace admitted, "but hands do. Eyes do, and courage does. That's what I'm offering." The mother didn't answer. She just walked away, leaving Grace standing in the echo of her own conviction. Later that evening, the group gathered again in Harriet's church basement. The mood was heavy. Angela rubbed her temples. "We need credibility. Without medical backing, people won't listen." Laura added, "And without funding, we can't rent spaces or print materials. Dreams don't pay invoices." Grace looked at the worn cross on the wall, then back at the circle of faces who had stood for her when no one else would. "So we keep going, even if it's one parent at a time, even if it's one life." Harriet reached across the table, her old hands steady. "Dreams don't pay invoices, but faith pays persistence. I'll talk to the congregation again. We'll gather what we can." Grace's chest tightened with gratitude. "I don't want charity. I want change." "And change," Harriet replied, "always starts looking like charity." They sat in silence, the kind that hurts but holds. That night, Grace returned home exhausted. She lit a candle beside Tyler's photo, whispering, "Help me, help me. Build something that saves more than one." Her phone buzzed. A text from Charles. "Jacob asked if you'd come tomorrow. He wants to show you a drawing." Grace typed slowly, "I'll be there." She set the phone down, staring at the flicker of the flame. For the first time, she realized this wasn't just about survival. It was about design. Building something that outlasted storms, charges, or pride. Hartwell wasn't a dream anymore. It was a seed, and seeds, even when planted in hard soil, had a way of breaking through. The gymnasium smelled of floor polish and faint chalk. Rows of folding chairs were set up beneath buzzing fluorescent lights, only half filled. Grace Miller stood at the front, palms pressed against the lectern to steady her nerves. She had spoken in court. She had begged for a child's life. But this standing before parents and teachers, trying to plant a seed, this felt heavier. Angela Kim adjusted the projector beside her. Harriet arranged handouts on the chairs with tender precision. Laura leaned against the wall at the back, arms folded, her eyes fierce and watchful. Grace cleared her throat. The hum of whispers quieted. She began simply, her voice low but steady. "My name is Grace. Some of you know me as the woman who carried a boy through the storm. Others know me as the maid who broke a lock. Both are true. But what matters is this Jacob Hawthorne is alive today because someone noticed the signs. A murmur rippled. A man in the back crossed his arms. Skeptical. Grace continued. I'm not a doctor. I'm not here to replace one. But I am a mother who lost her son because help came too late. And I am a woman who refused to let that happen. Twice, she lifted a photo of Tyler, edges worn soft by time. This was my boy. I couldn't save him. But I learned to recognize the breath that falters, the lips that turn blue, the fainting that isn't just daydreaming. I learned, and when Jacob collapsed, I saw the same signs. That's why I moved. The room stilled. Even the skeptic leaned forward. Angela stepped up, clicking to a slide of medical charts. This is what Grace is talking about. Arrhythmias, fainting spells, blue discoloration. These are warning bells. They're not always obvious, but if you see them, you call, you act. A mother in the second row raised her hand timidly. But what if it's nothing? Kids faint sometimes. Mine does when he skips lunch. Angela's answer was firm. Then you lose nothing by checking. But if it's something, you save a life. Harriet shuffled forward, her hands folded. I served a house where we were told not to touch, not to comfort. And I watched a boy grow up lonely. Sometimes rules protect power, not people. What you do with your hands, with your voice, can be the difference between silence and survival. Grace looked out at the faces-tired teachers, anxious parents, grandparents who had raised second generations. She took a step closer, her voice breaking just enough to carry truth. Don't wait for someone else. Don't believe you need permission to save a life. If you see it, if you feel attacked, that's all I ask. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then a woman in the back, holding a toddler on her hip, whispered, "That happened to my nephew last year. We thought he was pretending. He didn't make it." Her voice cracked. I wish I'd known. The room changed in that instant. Silence bent into something sharper, more attentive. By the end of the evening, only 30 people had come, but the sign-up sheet filled with names. Teachers asked for materials. Parents volunteered to spread the word. As they packed up, Grace sank into a folding chair, exhaustion overtaking her. Angela crouched beside her, offering a small smile. It wasn't a crowd, but it was a beginning. Harriet squeezed her shoulder. Movements don't start with noise. They start with truth. Tonight, you spoke it, Grace whispered, almost to herself. Maybe Tyler heard it too. 2 weeks later, data began trickling in. Angela slid a report across the table in Laura's office. 2 neighborhoods, emergency calls for fainting down, early referrals up. Parents are noticing, acting faster. Laura scanned the numbers, then leaned back. That's evidence. Real, measurable. This isn't just a story anymore, it's structure. Harriet smiled, eyes damp. Hartwell has a pulse. Grace pressed her hand over the report as if to steady it. This is only the start. Every parent who learns, every teacher who asks, sits one more heartbeat we're keeping. On a Saturday morning, Grace returned to Mercy Hills. Jacob sat in the sunlit playroom, crayons scattered around him. When he saw her, he beamed. "Grace, look what I made." He held up a drawing to figures with capes, one taller, one smaller, both with hearts drawn big and bright on their chests. Above them, in crooked letters, "Keepers of the Heartbeat." Grace knelt, tears stinging. "Is that us?" Jacob nodded proudly. "You and me. Heroes." She brushed his hair back gently. "You're the real hero, sunshine. You keep fighting every day." "No," he said firmly. "You showed me how." That evening, back at the Hawthorne estate, the halls were quieter than Grace remembered. The staff no longer avoided her gaze. Esther greeted her at the door with a warm smile, and Victoria was gone. Her departure left a strange vacuum, filled only by whispers. Some said she left angry, others that she couldn't stand being eclipsed. Charles never commented, but when Grace passed him in the hallway that night, his expression held both weariness and something softer. "You've done more than save my son," he said quietly. "You've given him back laughter. And maybe you've given me sight." Grace studied him for a long moment. "Sight is only the first step. What you do with it is the choice." He nodded slowly. "Then I choose to build with you." Back in her apartment, Grace placed Jacob's drawing beside Tyler's photo. Two boys, one lost, one saved, their images side by side. She whispered, "Into the dim light, your heartbeat didn't end, Tyler. It just found another rhythm." For the first time, she felt it, her grief not erased, but transformed into something that moved outward, growing roots in soil she never thought would hold. The story was no longer hers alone. It belonged to the people who listened, the parents who acted, the children who breathed because someone refused to wait. And as Grace blew out the candle, the flames seemed to linger, as if promising this light would not go out again. The conference room was brighter than Grace expected. Sunlight poured through the tall windows, catching on the polished oak table where a dozen people sat waiting. No marble, no chandeliers, just a clean space filled with nervous anticipation. Laura leaned toward Grace, whispering, "This is it. The first official board meeting. Hartwell begins today." Grace nodded, though her hands trembled under the table. She glanced at the faces gathered, Harriet eyes glowing with quiet pride. Angela, medical notes spread neatly in front of her. Two teachers from the pilot neighborhoods, a community leader clutching a worn notebook. They weren't dignitaries or power brokers. They were people who knew what it meant to keep watch over fragile lives. Charles entered last. He didn't sit at the head of the table, but beside them, shoulders squared, gaze clear. "We're here," he said simply, "because one woman refused to let silence win. Grace, the floor is yours." Grace rose slowly. Her voice was steady, though her heart pounded like a drum. "I never meant to build a foundation. I only meant to save a boy. But saving one child means facing the truth. Others are waiting, unseen. Hartwell isn't about me. It's about giving communities eyes to notice, hands to act, courage to step forward. Home isn't just walls, it's care, it's a verb." The room fell silent, moved not by grand rhetoric, but by the weight of simple truth. Later that day, in the quiet of the Hawthorne estate, Victoria Sterling stood in the study she had once ruled with icy elegance. Her suitcase rested by the door. Charles entered, his expression heavy. "You're really leaving," he said. Victoria's eyes glittered, but not with tears. "I loved the image, Charles, the power, the house, the headlines. I thought if I controlled the picture, I controlled the story. But you finally saw past the picture." His jaw tightened. "I saw my son. That's why I can't stay," she whispered. "Because I never really saw him, and she did." Charles said nothing, only nodded. For the first time, there was no venom between them, only a hollow acceptance. Victoria lifted her suitcase and walked out. Her heels echoed down the marble hall, fading into silence. In the sunroom, Jacob sat curled on a cushioned chair, crayons scattered across the table. When Grace entered, his face lit up like morning. "Miss Grace, look at my drawing." She knelt. Beside him, the paper showed a house, not grand like the estate, but simple, with windows glowing yellow. Two figures stood outside, one tall, one small, hands clasped. Above it, in wobbly letters, "Home." Grace swallowed hard. "Is this us?" Jacob grinned. "You said home is care, so I drew us caring." She pressed a kiss to the crown of his hair. "That's the best drawing I've ever seen." From across the room, Charles watched. His expression softened, humbled. "He hasn't stopped talking about you. He sleeps better now, knowing you're near." Grace met his gaze steadily. "I'm not here to fix what was broken. I'm here for him. That's all. And that," Charles said, "is more than I deserve." Weeks passed. The first official Hartwell workshop filled a community hall with parents, grandparents, and children. Grace stood at the front, not as a defendant, not as a maid, but as a voice. Angela explained symptoms with calm authority. Harriet handed out laminated cards with emergency steps. Jacob, sitting in the front row, raised his small hand. "My heart's tricky," he said shyly, "but Miss Grace makes me brave." The room broke into soft laughter, then applause. Grace blinked back tears. That evening, Grace sat alone in her apartment. Tyler's photo rested beside Jacob's newest drawing. She lit a candle and whispered, "Tyler, I couldn't save you. But Jacob breathes because I learned. And through him, through every child we reach, your heartbeat goes on." Her voice caught, but it carried warmth now, not only grief. The city outside hummed, alive with possibility. For the first time in years, Grace felt not like an intruder in the world, but like its architect. At the next board meeting, Charles surprised her with a simple announcement. "The board has approved initial grants. Hartwell is officially recognized." The room erupted in applause. Harriet clasped Grace's hand. Angela squeezed her shoulder. Laura gave a rare smile that reached her eyes. Charles turned to Grace. "You didn't just save my son. You gave us a new way to see him, and maybe to see ourselves." Grace stood, voice quiet but unwavering. "Then let's make sure every child, every parent, has someone who sees them too." The final scene unfolded in the sunroom again. Afternoon light poured through the windows, bathing everything in gold. Jacob sat at the table, coloring a superhero with a bright red cape. Grace read beside him, her hand resting gently over his. "Miss Grace," Jacob asked, suddenly. "Yes, sunshine. Are you going to stay forever?" Grace's throat tightened. She bent down, kissing his temple. "Every day you want me, I'll be here." He smiled, small fingers tightening around hers. Across the room, Charles watched silently, no words needed. The house felt different now, a fortress of pride, but a place of belonging. The camera of life would have pulled back there, the boy safe, the woman steady, the man changed. Yet in Grace's heart, it wasn't an ending. It was a beginning, because home wasn't marble or gates. Home was a verb, and she was finally living it.